Going to Mark chapter 1, verses 29 through 39. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Well, the Super Bowl is in a week. And with the Super Bowl coming up, I love watching diagrams of plays. I remember when John Madden started announcing, and they gave him a telestrator, and he started drawing all the diagrams on, and I really do love learning all of this stuff. And they keep getting more sophisticated in how they announce the games, and so you start feeling like a bit of an insider as they give you more of the terminology that they're using in calling plays. And what's really kind of cool is that they're very intricate plays, okay? So it's so different from what you did on the school ground playing touch football. And every single player has a role in every play. And so every player has a role, and every player's role varies. And sometimes that role is pretty minor, it seems, or you might think it is. Like sometimes the person's role is just to be a decoy. For example, in the Kansas City offense, they've got a player, some of their plays are designed to simply have one of the receivers pull a defender away, to just force a defender to go cover, just to leave room for Patrick Mahomes to run. All right, and so that's their job, is to just pull a defender with them so Mahomes has a gap to run into. And so sometimes you are the primary receiver, sometimes you are secondary, sometimes you're pretty much out of the play altogether, and yet every single player's role matters. Now, role is really central to the passage that we're talking about today. So what happens is that Simon, remember Simon is Peter, so he hasn't been renamed yet in the scripture. So when you see Simon here, it's Simon Peter. So it's Peter. Peter's mother-in-law is sick. And they summon him to the house. He heals Simon's mother-in-law, and it says he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. And, whenever I read this, it reminds me of my mother. Because, when my mom was sick, mom would still serve. Like, my mom could be sick, and then I would go to mom, and I'd go, "Mom, what's for dinner?" Right, so she's in bed and she's sick, and what would mom do? She would drag herself out of bed, even without Jesus coming to heal her and make her better. She would drag herself out of bed and make dinner. So if I was sick, I still asked Mom, "What's for dinner?" When my dad was sick, he still asked Mom, "What's for dinner?" Okay? When we were sick, we were just dead to the world and out. And of course, it was my mother who came and served us. So sometimes when I read this and it says, "Oh, the fever left her, so she's been sick, Jesus heals her, and what's she do? She just gets up to start to serve." And I think, well, that's kind of archaic. All right, that doesn't seem like the sort of thing that we would extol in our society today. It seems like such a traditional, stereotypical role for the woman of the house. But in that time, it was her role to play. That was her role to play. That was how she contributed. And it is a reminder to us that sometimes our role is not glamorous. Sometimes the role that we are called to play is not one that leads us to be the star. It's not one that leads us to be the center of attention. And sometimes we have to think more broadly about what it is that we're called to do. I mean, a lot of people ask themselves the question, what am I supposed to be doing? What's my purpose? What am I supposed to be doing with my life? And too often when I talk to people about that question, they're often considering themselves in isolation. All All right, they're thinking of themselves isolated from everything around them. But I think that more often we will find the purpose, find the role that we're supposed to be playing when we remember that we're not acting in isolation, but rather we're acting as a part of a team. And so one of the questions that I think we always have to keep in front of us is to ask ourselves, well, what's our team? And we're on more than one team at once in life. You've got team family, all right? You've got team career, okay? You've got team faith, You've got these different teams that you're on in your life. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what does it mean for the team to win? And then that can give you a clearer idea of the role that you might be called to play. I mean, on a football team, it's easy, right? When they're drawing up the play, it's easy for them to do that because they understand who their team is and they understand what the objective of their team is. And so when they understand that with such clarity, who's the team and what does it mean for the team to win, it becomes easier for them to draw up plays and for each player on the team to understand what their role is in helping the team succeed. And I think that we often need to remember that in life, we're not playing life alone, but rather we are on a team, and we need to think about what it means for the team or teams that we are on to win. And when we do that, we have a better opportunity to understand what our role might be. Now, there are things that drag us away from that. Okay, so what happens is Jesus is being really successful at healing. In fact, he is so successful at healing that it says the whole city was gathered around the door. Now, this is probably hyperbole, okay, but nonetheless, word is getting out. He's being really successful at healing, and everyone wants healing, and so they are bringing people to the house. So you open up the door, and all you see is people who are coming to the house, coming for healing. And Jesus could have just stayed there. He could have stayed there and just kept healing people. He could have just done it for as many hours as he wanted to do it. He could sit there and say, okay, I'm done for the day, come back tomorrow, I'm going to have dinner, and people would still be coming. He could keep healing people, and people would start to bring their people, right? So that's what would happen. Word would get out, and next thing you know, everyone's telling everyone they know, and the word is spreading from town to town. If you've got someone who's sick, what you need to do is just figure out a way to get them over to this town where Jesus is, get to this house, and he will heal them. He could have stayed there forever. And that's a problem, because that's not what he was supposed to do. And sometimes it's a reminder for us that success can actually be a distraction from what we're supposed to be doing. Because we can get so caught up in being successful at what we're doing, or really caught up in the external affirmation and the external validation of what it is that we're doing, that we end up allowing everyone else to determine what we ought to do. The success can end up trapping us by allowing other people to dictate what's going to happen. Because the other people just wanted Jesus to stay there. They would have given him all the acclaim, all the praise, all the affirmation that it would take to just have him stay there and continue to heal them. But we always have to be careful to make sure that we're maintaining a sense of our own self, or else we're allowing everyone around us to dictate how we're supposed to live our lives. We have to remember that we have to determine what it is that we are supposed to be doing, all right, and not let everyone else dictate to us what it is. You can become so caught up in success, so caught up in popularity, that in fact you end up being a prisoner of it. You end up being trapped by your success, trapped by your popularity. You lose all the sense of yourself, and you end up with everyone else dictating to you how it is that you should be living. And so Jesus stays in touch with his own needs, his own life, his own purpose by going off and praying. While it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place. He withdrew from the crowd, something that he would do fairly often. He withdrew from the crowd to get distance from the crowd in order to remove himself from their influence, in order that he could decide for himself what it was that he needed to do next, that he could decide in prayer. And this is something that we need to remember to do, is to stay connected to our purpose through prayer. To evaluate what it is that we ought to be doing, we need to withdraw from the crowd so that the people are not deciding for us what it is that we ought to do. Because it's really easy to have everyone else decide. Like we're seeing this at the end of the football season. Right now, at the end of football season, you have athletes who may still be playing well, and they're thinking about whether to retire, and you have fans wanting them not to retire. Like, we've all heard about Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, right? And so, if you haven't, I don't know where you've been. Okay? And I'm pretty much watching the Super Bowl for the game and the cutaway shots to Taylor. But, Travis Kelce's brother, Jason Kelce, is one of the best centers to ever play the game. He played for Philadelphia. And he's talked about retiring, and it looks like he's told his teammates that he's actually going to retire this year, even though he is still at the top of his game. As old as he is still an amazing player. He's one of the best centers to ever play the game. And the fans in Philadelphia don't want him to retire because he can still play. He's not a liability. He's still good. They want him to play. They want him to keep going because he can still really contribute well, and they don't know what they're going to do without him. And he's been conflicted. He thought about retiring last year, but he came back for another year. He came back for another year because of his obligations to the team, the Eagles, that he's on. But he's also talking about retiring, and it looks like he's decided to retire because of the other team that he's on, which is Team Family. And he talked about the fact that one of the things he's very cognizant of is the continuing toll that football is taking on his body. And he said, I want to be able to get on the floor and play with my kids without pain. And so it looks like that he's deciding that his obligation to Team Family is more important than his obligation to the Eagles. And he's going to hang it up, even though he could still be one of the best centers in the game. But he's going to decide for himself what he needs to be doing rather than having the fans decide for him or the lure of the money that he could get in a new contract. He's going to decide what's best for him. Because everyone does want to decide for you. It says in the passage that when Jesus went away to pray, Simon and his companions hunted for him. And that word hunted in the Greek actually implies adversarial. It's sort of an annoyed. It's not that they went looking for him. That's why they used hunted as a translation instead of looked for him, because they weren't just trying to find out where he was. There's a sense of annoyance involved, kind of like a parent hunting for their child at the mall. All right, the child has somehow escaped your custody, and you want to know where they are, and you aren't just like looking for them, you're hunting for them, and you're not terribly pleased that you have to be. And that's the implication of this word. They're annoyed because they want Jesus to be what they want him to be. They want Jesus to do what they want him to do, and Jesus decides to run off on his own and instead pray by himself to figure out what's next. No. They want to tell him what ought to be next. And the thing is, other people will often try and pigeonhole us into something that we're successful at. Jesus is really good at this healing thing, and they'd love to pigeonhole him at that. And this can happen. Others often may limit you to the role that you've always played. And if you cave into the need for the external validation as the way you decide what you're going to do, you might do that to yourself as well. People have seen you do something, they've seen you be good at it, and they decide that's the only thing you ought to do, and you ought to just keep doing that. It can become a vicious circle where you're good at it, you get affirmed at it, and so you just keep doing it and you never break out into doing something else. Actors get typecast, right? That happens all the time. You get an actor who plays a particular role well, and that's the only kind of role they ever get offered again. Or before I went to seminary for 20 years in the church, working, not working, but volunteering in churches and at different levels, I got typecast as a numbers guy, dealing with budgets because I could read one, which was a relatively unusual skill. So I got typecast as going into situations where there was a money problem. I actually spent 1 year where I was the presbytery's loan collector. That was really not fun. Yeah, that was not fun at all. But it was because I was good at numbers, so I got sent in. And it got kind of boring after a while. All right? Yeah, I can do it, and yeah, they validate my ability to do it, but I also, inside, was feeling like, hey, I'd kind of like to get involved in the other aspects of church, the people side of things, and they were always like, no, we got people to do that. You're a numbers guy. Stay with that. Pretty limiting. But Jesus has the self-assurance, the self-confidence to be able to say, I'm not going to be boxed in. He says, let's go on to the neighboring towns so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do. It takes real courage and self-assurance to be able to say, hey, look, this is what I am. This is what I'm supposed to do. I have to go do my next thing. It takes real courage to stand up for that and say, I have to do my next thing when you are all saying that I should just stay here and do that. And sometimes they do sit there and they say, you should stay and do it because you're so good at it. Here's a fact that I've learned over the years. You're actually good at more things than you're meant to do at a particular time. So many times people find something that they're good at and they do it and they keep doing it. It's like, yeah, but you're good at more than one thing. You're actually good at more than one thing. People underestimate how much they're actually good at. And so they find something that they're good at and they stay stuck in it. That's one thing that I found in the church. Really, with folks here, it's been so amazing when we discover the gifts that people had that we didn't know they had. That they were able to do things that we didn't know they were able to do. And often no one ever asked them to do the other thing because they were good at the first thing they were doing. It's like, oh, you're good at this, so you get to keep doing this. And next time we have a thing, you get to do this. You're our that thing person because you've always done that thing and you're good at that thing. And then you find out, oh my gosh, there's this other thing that they're also really good at. And then, of course, being churches that never really change, they become pigeonholed as the next thing person. Okay? But you're good at more than what you're meant to do for a time. Because often what you're meant to do is for a given time and not necessarily for all time. Because situations change and your giftedness is broad. And so the role that you should be playing at a particular time sits at this intersection of your giftedness and the situation that you're in. That you're constantly looking at, where am I? What's the context of where I'm at? What team am I on at the moment? What would help the team succeed? What's the breadth of the gifts that I have? And then what role can I play at that time that sits at the intersection of my giftedness and the context that I'm in? I mean, after all, that's what happens with those football players, right? Those football players are playing a different role play by play. I mean, after all, I said, sometimes that player's job is to be a decoy. But here's the thing. If that player is a decoy every single play, they're no longer a decoy, right? Because everyone will know, oh, they don't actually do anything. They're just always the decoy, so we can ignore them. But instead, in the course of a game and in the course of a season, they have to do all the different things that they may be called to do. All right? They have to be able to run. They have to be able to catch a ball. They have to be able to block. They have to do all the things that they might have to do where they have one particular role in one particular context on one particular play, and then they do something very different at another time. It's a continual reevaluation of what it is that they're called to do based on the context that they're in. And so Jesus moves on, and he continues to do things that he was doing. It says he went throughout Galilee, so he keeps going to different places, and he proclaims the message, so he keeps teaching, he keeps healing, he keeps moving, he keeps adjusting to the situation that he finds himself in. And he even gets detoured along the way. So he gets to places and certain circumstances arise, and he discovers that he needs to go back to a place that he just came from, or he needs to go somewhere where he wasn't planning to go, because he's adjusting to the circumstance that he finds himself in. And when he says, "This is what I came to do," remember, that's not all he came to do. He did also come to go to Calvary and die for sin. But he didn't just do that either. He did the various things along the way, and he came to do all of them. He came to teach, he came to heal, he came to die for us, he came to be raised. All of those things were what he came to do. And that's a lesson for us, that the path to our purpose may run through many different roles in our lives. That we will play all kinds of different roles, that there's a larger purpose that we serve that remains a constant, but our role in serving that purpose may change from situation to situation to situation. And it's always, at every point, examining the context that you're in, not being drawn into having your role dictated by the people around you, but by your own prayerful relationship with God, understanding that your job is to help the team succeed, and taken together, it feeds into a purpose. And as I look back on my own life, all the different roles that I've played in different contexts that I've been in, none of it was wasted by God. All of it served a purpose. All of it taught me something. All of it allowed me to contribute in different ways. And ultimately, all of it brought me toward a path that has not ended, but continues. And at the end of my life, I hope to be able to say that I served a purpose. But in serving that purpose, it wasn't just doing one thing in one place for all of my life, but rather it was doing the various things that I was called to do, the various roles I was called to play at every phase along the way. So I encourage you to stay in touch with the role God is calling you to play right now, in this time in your life, in this season in your life, in this context that you find yourself in, with the breadth of giftedness that you have, because you have more gifts than you may even realize you have. And you are on more than one team in your life. How can you bring those gifts to bear to help the teams that you're on find success and serve the purpose of serving God? Amen.